Ukraine's defense intelligence chief says Russia is moving troops and preparing to attack his country, but this time in a much more devastating way than during the conflict that started in 2014 and saw around 14,000 Ukrainians killed. Howard Altman is senior managing editor of Military Times. Howard, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, give us a big picture view. What are Russia's interests in action against Ukraine?
Well, it's really unknown exactly what they're going to do. I had a recent discussion with Kirill Budanov, who is the head of Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency, and he told me that there's about 92,000 Russian troops arrayed around Ukraine's border, and they're preparing to attack in late January, early February timeframe. And that attack would consist of armor, air strikes. There would be paratroops in the western part of Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine. There would be incursion perhaps through Belarus, and then some incursions via the sea through Odessa and Mariupol. So it would be a major attack, unlike anything that has seen so far since 2014.
But what is Russia doing right now in Ukraine? Because I understand there's some disinformation campaigns going on inside the country.
Well, Budanov told me that before any attack would happen, that they're preparing to try to destabilize the Ukraine government through the anti-COVID vaccine campaign, for instance, through other means to say that the government isn't taking care of them. There's something called Warnergate, which is a kind of a complex controversy involving some members of the Wagner private group that's Russian mercenaries. So Budanov was saying that the Russians are trying to sow dissatisfaction and destabilize Ukraine before an invasion would begin.
So are American intelligence assessments the same? Are they seeing the same thing?
According to Budanov, yes, that they're very similar. And the U.S. has constantly warned that they're concerned by these Russian troop movements. Just yesterday, Mark Carlin from the Pentagon talked about how they were worrisome. The Pentagon's mentioned several times how these movements are of concern.
So, as you mentioned, the general that you spoke to, the Ukrainian general, says the attack is coming in either January or February.
He said they're preparing for an attack. Now, their Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, told the Washington Post he doesn't know if Putin's made that decision, and the U.S. doesn't really know either. The Pentagon has consistently said that they don't know what's in Putin's mind. So it's really unknown.
No, nobody knows that.
Nobody really knows.
But what if that did happen? What would be the geopolitical consequences of Russia attacking Ukraine?
Well, it would be huge, because it would be, you know, in the previous incursion into Ukraine in 2014, it was done by so-called little green men. It was in this sort of gray zone. It wasn't completely clear, although everybody knew it was the Russians involved. This would be different. You'd be seeing Russian tanks, Russian paratroopers, you know, Russian aircraft. That would be a big game changer in terms of an attack on Ukraine.
So what can the Pentagon do to deter that kind of action, or is it already too late?
Well, the Pentagon, there's been no U.S. troop movements or equipment movements in reaction to this particular situation. I talked to the Pentagon yesterday. There had been a change in philosophy overall between the Trump and Biden administrations. When the Biden administration came in, they opted to not move 25,000 troops out of Germany, actually plussed it up about 500. So there was that philosophy change, but there's been no U.S. troop or movements or equipment movements. The Pentagon is not saying what it's going to do. It's a decision by the White House. The White House hasn't really said what it will do, and there's discussions about additional sanctions, discussions about additional weaponry provided to Ukraine, but there's no discussion about what will happen if Russia invades and what U.S. troops will do.
What are American strategic interests in Ukraine? Why should Americans care whether or not Russia attacks Ukraine?
Well, that's always a very good question. I mean, there's a historical context and a current context. The historical context is that in 1994, Ukraine which would had just broken off from the Soviet Union, which had fallen apart, had the third largest nuclear arms arsenal in the world. And so there was an agreement that was drawn up back then that Russia would not attack Ukraine if Ukraine got rid of those arms. So that was the historical context. Current context is that Ukraine is a bulwark against Russian incursion. They're a democracy that the U.S. supports. That and there's also other bigger picture items. You guarantee that China is going to be watching what the U.S. does in reaction to any particular Russian incursion into Ukraine. And they've already used the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in information operations against Taiwan, saying, look, the U.S. cut and run back then, so you know China's going to be watching very carefully. So there's a big picture and smaller picture.
And what is Ukraine hoping to get from Washington quickly, just in the time we have left?
Sure. Ukraine, Budanov told me that they'd like additional air, missile, and drone defense systems, jamming devices. They like the Patriot missile system, the CRAM system, those kinds of things.
All right. Well, Howard, thanks so much. I guess we'll see what happens.
Thanks.